Let me start over. Let me start over.
Okay.
This is going to be a new feature on my channel, and we're going to talk about music, of course. And I'm here today with my daughter, and we're going to talk about power pop is the topic for today. And she has a little insight into power pop. And personally, I never heard the term during the 70s, and she's going to possibly explain it a little bit for me.
Best I can, I guess.
Go ahead.
So it was a term that was coined by Pete Townsend for the single "Pictures of Lily."
Oh,
And when
really?
you, yeah,
Okay.
and when you listen to that song, you can really see the roots of what it would become. Because I was doing a competition where I was playing as the genre, and we had to talk about the roots.
Right.
And when I listened to that song closely with that in mind, like it's not the exact thing, of course, it's an
Yeah.
evolution, but you can really see the basis of how power pop would sound, especially in the 70s. So,
Okay.
and
That's a
he
great
actually
song.
coined it in a interview in some magazine. I can't remember right at the moment which one, but
I don't remember it ever being used like, oh, this is the latest whatever power pop song, or but it really goes into the 70s more, I think,
yeah,
when it became coined more generally, I guess, because like I
yeah.
said, I never really heard it in the 70s.
Its peak in popularity, I would say, would be like the mid to late 70s into the turn of the 80s. And
Okay.
then it got kind of overexposed by stuff like the Knack. My Sharona was kind of like the nail in its coffin for the
Oh,
first wave, as far as like labels wanting to promote it and people wanting to buy
uh,
it. I guess that's it was so overexposed that it kind of
I just owe that song actually. That
there you go. That's what
I Sharona, right? Oh my
yeah,
God.
My
Yeah,
Sharona.
yeah. I remember that album was everywhere and it was
Yes.
played
And then
constantly. So that's sort of where power pop as a term became kind of went way up and then
yeah.
came back down as a term, I guess, or a form of music. Or,
Well, its popularity at that point plummeted.
right.
It really it was kind of like with disco. It was kind of the similar idea that it caused it to be less well regarded or
Well, there was new wave and all that coming around that time too. So that was like it was sort of poppy too. I mean, some of it. I remember there's some bands there like that I don't see too much around now, but Pearl Harbor and the Explosions, and there was a bunch of bands there, and they were doing what they called new wave, and it was real kind of poppy rock stuff.
they're closely related in a lot of ways. I mean, power pop is more guitar based, I think, and new wave's kind of more synthesizer, But the same when you look at a lot of the power pop that was coming out around the time of new wave, there's a lot of overlap. Like stuff like the Cars. The Cars you can kind of
Okay,
call both power pop and new wave kind of at
right,
the same time
I can
because you have
I can see that.
elements of both. And
So
yeah, you see people call them both. So
in the early '70s, where would the sort of the roots would probably be more so in the early '70s, wouldn't it?
yeah. So
I,
that would be like Badfinger and like Emmett Rhodes,
okay,
Big Star,
yeah.
the Raspberries, stuff like that.
The raspberries. Don't like.
I know your favorite.
I do. I never listened to this album before, and I had it for years. I didn't even know it was a twofer. But the first album by Big Star, which I remember hearing about all the time when it came out, and it was supposed to be the
Hmm.
next big thing, and it kind of fit, it bombed, I guess, big time.
Yeah.
But I've been listening to this album for the last week, and the first one, and I really like it. I mean,
Oh yeah, it's one of my favorites. It's one of my top 10 albums of all time,
yeah,
actually.
some of the slower songs are real catchy. They just stick with you. And what I heard in this, and I see I've heard a lot of Canadian sort of influence in this. Or I mean, if this was a Canadian band, I think they would have done better, like in Canada type of thing. I
Maybe.
hear that there's a group in the '60s called Kensington Market, and they really, I could see that an influence. These guys probably never heard them, but they might have. And also later on, Grapes of Wrath, I can sort of
Yeah,
hear some of the. They must have been influenced by Big Star. So
absolutely. So it's funny because you say Grapes of Wrath, they don't get tagged as power pop very often on like sites like Rate Your Music,
yeah,
but there's a definite power pop influence in their music. And when I was playing in that competition, actually, we had to pick a song that's not tagged as power pop,
Right.
but is power pop. And I picked a Grapes of Wrath song.
Yeah.
So it's funny that you say that because that,
Yeah.
yeah.
I kind of heard that, and especially some of the ballady kind of stuff. I heard that just the influence had to be there. Now, what's some other things from the 70s that have you got some things to show there that would be considered power pop?
So I kind of, when I picked the records, I went a different direction. I didn't grab a lot of 70s, but I do have Shoes, which is I don't know how commercially popular they really were, but they're huge with people who are really into power pop. They're kind of one of the big guns, I would say.
Okay. I never heard them. I've heard of them, but never heard them. So.
Yeah, so they're really good. Someone like Todd Rundgren, he has songs that were influential to power pop, or like Couldn't I Just Tell You is like a perfect power pop song, but he's not really a power pop artist because he's done lots of different things. But he did one album with his band Utopia in '82 that's perfect power pop, which is this one. Because Utopia went in a lot of different directions as well. Then they did pop rock and all kinds of stuff. But
I like a few singles that he put out, but basically I don't. And I actually had a Utopia album, but certainly wasn't power pop. The one I had was 70s one, and it was more of a experimental type of thing.
Yeah, that Utopia albums went in all kinds of different directions, just like his own albums. I mean, you can't really call him any one thing at all. So
I know that this album is fairly influential on the power pop scene, isn't it? The Cheap Trick Killer.
Heaven Tonight as well, which I almost grabbed, but you said you were going to show Cheap Trick. So
yeah,
but
I love this album. I had it, and I remember listening to it a lot. But I like I say, as a term, I never really got into genres per se, like especially subgenres, I guess you would say. I sort of stick to basic, the basic like rock, metal, country rock. That's about as far as I go. Maybe folk rock and stuff like that. But, so I know you have some other. When you go into the '80s, it started to sort of pick up again.
Well, the '80s are a weird time for power pop. So I have this book that's a great resource if anyone's interested in power pop. It's the top 200 albums.
Oh yeah.
And I'm slowly going through and listening to as many as I can. I'm only at 30 right now, so eventually I'll get there. But some of the '80s stuff in this book has not been as good for me. Like the '80s, especially the mid to late '80s production, I don't think did power pop music any favors. So
let's go back to the '70s then, and what are a few other groups from the '70s then that would fit into that genre?
Well, you've got the Records. The Toms is a really good one. That one, it's basically, it's not even a band. It's a guy who played all the instruments and sang, wrote all the songs, self-produced the album, but it's just like this perfect masterpiece of power pop.
What is it called?
The Toms. His name was Tom, so it's just
the Toms. Okay, there's one.
Yeah, I don't have that. That stuff's pretty obscure, so it's on streaming, but I don't have physical copies.
Okay. But wouldn't power pop be more commercially viable? Like,
well, if that's kind of the commercial stuff is not the stuff that I find was good. Like when I'm looking through, we've got like bands like 2020 and Shoes and the Toms. They're all the best stuff. The Beat is another one, which I don't know how commercially successful they were, but they were successful enough that when the Beat from England came, the ska band, that's why we call them the English Beat here, because the Beat band existed. So.
Right.
But yeah, I think Cheap Trick would probably be the biggest. And the Knack, of course.
Well, because I never, I don't know. With the Big Star thing, I really like. And Cheap Trick, there's a little gap there. What's that album? 77 or?
Yeah.
I think, well, whatever, around that period. So I was listening to some power pop and really never thought of it. Didn't know, I guess. Yeah. And you had some other bands from we're skipping ahead to the '90s or?
Yeah, the '90s there was a resurgence. It was a little different, of course, but it.
Yeah, of course.
So of course you have Matthew Sweet's Girlfriend.
Yeah, I got that album. That's a good album.
Good one.
Yeah,
and the big one, Weezer's Blue Album. would be
Okay.
a really big one.
Yeah, I've never heard.
They went in a different direction, I'd say, right after that with Pinkerton, but
Okay.
that's pretty well a perfect example.
Yeah, I never.
Jellyfish is another one who wasn't big
Okay.
at the time, but they've really had a resurgence online,
Yeah, I
especially
see
with
their name coming around quite a bit.
yeah.
So they're
So, but
considered.
they're a little more classic rocky too. Like they're not
Okay.
strictly power pop. I wouldn't say they would.
Yeah.
They have
I might check them out actually because I've
yeah.
seen them
Yeah,
mentioned.
they're really good.
Yeah.
And stuff like Super Drag is a good and
Right.
Not a Surf, stuff like that. But they go a little later too, later into the 90s and into the 2000s. But
So basically, you're taking pop music and adding a heavier beat to it, sort of
guitar, yeah,
catchy, usually
yeah,
catchy songs.
catchy
That's
songs.
sort of the underlying,
Yeah,
I guess,
it's
theme.
hard to define in words. It's kind of like one of those
Yeah.
things when you hear it, you know it's power pop.
Yeah.
And I see a lot of people call things power pop that I don't necessarily think sound like power
Well, of
pop
course.
because so it's a really hard one to
Well,
nail down to just like explain because I think the
Right.
rate your music definition of the genre is economical arrangements with electric guitar and catchy songs, which that can describe a lot of things. I think to an extent it's somewhat Beatlesque at sometimes, like kind of
Okay.
remind
Yeah.
that kind of idea, like harmonies and.
Yeah, you could probably go back there and really.
I'd say the Beatles
you
have
wanted
a
to
big
dig
influence
deep.
on a lot of them. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, any kind of genre. I mean, everybody's going to dispute, what is, what isn't, and that's just part of the music game, I guess. Just
Yeah.
is it? Isn't it? For me, I don't really, like I said, just basic. I mean, all the subgenres. There's just what's the subgenre of pop? Power pop. Is there any?
Well, I mean, I guess new wave is like a
Well, that's
related.
what I
I don't know
remember.
that it's a subgenre of it, but it's like
Yeah.
you're in the
Because-
same ballpark. And new wave, I think, was more commercially successful. I would say, and like Nick
It was
Lowe.
Another Nick Lowe.
I know your favorite.
No. But I remember there was another band called Robin Lane and the Chartbusters, I think they were called. Like there was and they all had long names, like I said, Pearl Harbor and the Explosions. And I bought some of those albums and they were good for about 2 or 3 listens. And then it was like, oh God, they were boring. So,
yeah.
and I never hear them talk
Heard
about
of those? No, I've never even come
Yeah.
across them. Unless
I have-
we might be in the book later, but
maybe, but they all had longer names, like
yeah.
but
Which
I-
is unusual, which isn't really power pop's more catchy names like the
Yeah.
he's like
yeah,
the
Big
Beat,
Star,
um,
Cheap Trick, and
The Knack,
Weezer,
yeah.
whatever.
yeah.
Get the knack.
That's
Okay.
not one of the better albums, I don't think. It was in the book and it's in their top 10, but I don't think it's necessarily as an album worthy of being there. I like My Sharona, but I don't think that album is as good as some other stuff that's less talked about.
Yeah.
Well,
okay.
big shout out would be an album I recently found out about, and it's by this guy Van Duren, and it's just
Oh yeah, I've
it's
heard that.
amazing. It's
Yeah.
a great. Oh really? Yeah, I hadn't heard about it at all.
I
so,
just heard it. I haven't heard it, but I've heard the name.
yeah.
All right. Well, that gives us a little glimpse into power pop, and I think we'll sign off now. So this is I don't know what we're going to call this. Music talk. I mean, that's generic, but I guess that's what it is basically. So till next time. So long.